With South Carolina's women's basketball program having recently claimed their third ever national championship, have they officially reached Dynasty status? I don't think so, but they are close.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and also the lead publisher for Gamecock Digest over on Fan Nation. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch for your team here today. We are free and available both wherever you get your audio podcasts daily and also on YouTube. Happy Wednesday to all of you. We're going to touch on a lot on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Gamecocks. The Gamecocks baseball team moved on in the SEC baseball tournament in Hoover and are set to take on the Arkansas Razorbacks later this afternoon. What golden opportunity stands in front of them? We'll also talk about some recent comments that were made by Shane Beamer on his Welcome Home tour, where he talked about LaNorris Sellers and the one trait that is really showing up in his progression throughout this offseason. But before we dive into all of that, I want to talk about something that, honestly, I probably should have talked about maybe a month and a half ago, but just hadn't gotten to it yet, so I decided to revisit it on today's show. And that is the conversation regarding South Carolina's women's basketball team and whether or not they've officially reached Dynasty status. While they are by far the top program in the sport right now, I don't think the Gamecocks are a dynasty quite yet, despite their recent success, but I will also say they are definitely on the precipice of becoming a dynasty. So the first thing that we have to address with this conversation is, what exactly is a dynasty? What defines a dynastic run in sports? And the beautiful part about this conversation is you could grab 10 random sports fans and ask them that question. Every single one of their answers is probably going to be different. To keep this short and sweet, I have two different definitions. One that looks at the short term and one that looks at the long term. So, if you look at a stretch of 4 years or less, and a team in a particular sport wins 3 national titles in that stretch, then that is a dynasty, in essence. If you look at a stretch that goes 5 years or longer, and a program is winning a national championship at least half the time, or even more, then that is also a dynasty. So, if you win 3 titles in 6 years, I consider that to be a dynasty. If you win 4 titles in 8 years, I consider that to be a dynasty. So on and so forth. So, to take this back to South Carolina's women's basketball team, they have won 3 national titles in the last 7 years. So, going off of just my own personal definition, it doesn't have to be your definition. You can define it to be whatever you want to be. But going off of my own definition, I don't think South Carolina is in the midst of a dynastic run. However, they are very close. There's only one thing that they have to do in order to officially make this a dynastic run. Repeat. Win the national championship again next season. If you do that, you would have won 3 out of the last 4 national championships, so you already have a short-term dynasty run right there in and of itself. And then including the 2017 national title, that would be 4 titles in the span of 8 NCAA tournaments that have taken place, because again, we have to put the asterisk in there about how the 2020 tournament did not take place because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So, in the long term, it would also be considered a dynastic run if South Carolina wins the title next season. So the reason why I say, to this point, that this is not a dynasty is because I believe that too much time passed between the Gamecocks' first national title victory in 2017 and then their second national title win that took place in 2022. too. And I already know some people are going to, one, jump in the comments and say that they completely and vehemently disagree with me on this. Totally fine with that. Just please tell me what's your definition of a dynasty and give me reasons why. But also, I know people are going to look back at that 2020 season or the tournament that never took place and say, but South Carolina finished as the unanimous number one ranked team in the country. So they should basically be able to claim that that was a national championship. I don't quite agree with that. I used to agree that if South Carolina had played Oregon in that NCAA tournament, Oregon and South Carolina were the top two teams, according to most people that year. I believe South Carolina back then would have won it. However, after what happened against Caitlin Clark in Iowa 2 seasons ago, considering that that team overall was not as talented as that Oregon team that South Carolina wound up never playing in that 2019-20 season and tournament, that gave me more cause to pause. And now, since then, I now believe that if South Carolina had played Oregon in that tournament, it might not have been a guarantee. Because you got to recall, Sabrina Ionescu was on that Oregon team. She had plenty of future WNBA All-Stars as teammates on her team. South Carolina, as great as that team was, and it was a really doggone good team, and it stinks that players like Kiki Herbert Harrigan and Taisha Harris were unable to play for a national title. They deserved it, and it was stripped away from them because of external circumstances that were out of their control. But I don't think it's a guarantee they would have won it, y'all. I just don't think so. Because you also had a bunch of freshmen that you would have had to lean on to outplay seniors who had played this game for a very long time and had played at a pretty high level to that point. And if you want examples of other dynastic runs in women's college basketball history, all you got to do is look at teams like Tennessee and UConn. Tennessee won 3 national championships between 1987 and 1991. In 1996 to 98, they three-peated. They won each and every national championship in that run. UConn won 4 national championships between the years of 2000 and 2004. And then, between 2009 and 2016, the Huskies won 6 national championships. They won 10 titles in the span of 16 years. Short-term and long-term dynasties for both programs in those aspects. So, for South Carolina, this is not to diminish what they have done the past few years. Please understand that. They have accomplished remarkable things. They went undefeated last season. They pretty much checked off every single box at this point that you need to check off in order to be considered a blue blood, prestigious, historic, a legacy program in this sport. The only thing left, going back to back, winning consecutive national titles, one thing South Carolina has not done. And again, if we're just going off of the definition that I gave y'all earlier, winning, in this case, a 4th national title in 8 seasons and 3 out of the last 4. If they do all that next season, absolutely nobody can take away anything that South Carolina has ever done in this sport. And they will forever be up there on the same level as UConn and Tennessee when you talk about the history of the game. They're not there yet, but they're very, very close. All they got to do is win the national title next year, and then it is officially a dynasty, at least in my eyes. Now, South Carolina's football program, right now, they're not competing to claim a dynasty in their respective sport, but they are competing for something that is just as valuable for them, and that is getting back on the right track, getting back to the postseason, and making sure that one down year does not turn into 2 down years. And if that's going to happen, then they're going to need quarterback LaNorris Sellers to be the guy that he is hyped up, or has been hyped up to be, in a hurry. And based on what Shea Beamer said at his recent welcome home tour stop in Myrtle Beach, it seems like LaNorris Sellers is already displaying some veteran-like traits that show that he could play well beyond his years as early as the 2024 season. We'll talk about what he said in just a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience is the formula for winning championships and also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. We cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. And as always, a big thank you to each and every one of you everydayers who made the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first choice for South Carolina Gamecock sports coverage. LaNorris Sellers, he has never started a game in his college career to this point, and heck, he's only played about 21 career snaps, all of course taking place this past fall in his true freshman campaign. But based on what Shane Beamer said at a recent welcome home tour stop in Myrtle Beach, LaNorris Sellers is already displaying an innate intangible of a starting quarterback that's been starting for a couple years. And it might be a trait that his predecessor sort of helped give to him. So, with Shane Beamer's quote, this is what he had to say a day or two ago when he was at his welcome home tour stop in Myrtle Beach. This quote comes from a video that was posted on YouTube by Gamecock Central, so full credit to them for the following quote that I'm about to read off to y'all. Here's what Shane Beamer had to say about LaNorris Sellers. Quote, "He's the definition of steady and consistent. It's a great quality to have in a quarterback, just that steadiness where you're not up and down and emotional and riding the waves of the highs and the lows. If there's one particular thing that can take down any great athlete, it is how you respond emotionally to a variety of different situations. You're going to run into adversity at some point, and I know that sounds like a cliche even for all of you folks that play just high school sports, but it is honestly the truth. Nobody's life goes perfectly. At some point, you're going to run into an obstacle. You're going to run into some external circumstances that are out of your control that are going to affect you directly. But what determines the outcome is more so how you respond to said situation. And so, because LaNorris Sellers is already displaying this is a great sign for South Carolina, because this upcoming season, it is going to be the pivotal season in Shane Beamer's tenure, and I get it. It feels like we've said that now for each of the last 3 years. Forget that. This season, extremely important, because in this case, Shane Beamer and this football team, they have to hit a certain win mark. First year, it was his first season. Anything beyond 4 wins, the fan base was going to take. The second season, obviously heightened expectations with Spencer Rattler at quarterback. Turned around and won 8 games. Still, fan base would have been fine with just even winning 7 games, but the cherry on top was defeating Clemson, going to the Gator Bowl, having a great game against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Year 3, it was a mixture of opinions, but no real set win mark. Some fans thought this team could win 8 or 9 games. Some said 5 or 6. They wound up going 5 and 7. But this year, for the first time in Shane Beamer's tenure here in Columbia, it truly feels like that the fan base, they are on the same page in terms of this is the set goal, you better meet it. There is no other option. You can't go 5 and 7 again, and gosh forbid you can't go worse than 5 and 7. You have better hit 6 and 6 or better. You better win at least 6 games. And so, that pressure that's going to be put on Shane Beamer and the staff in order to perform this fall is also going to be put on LaNorris Sellers, because he is the one guy outside of the center that is going to touch the ball literally every single play when the offense is out there on the field. So, the fact that LaNorris Sellers is already showing that he does not let some little things build up inside of him, cause him to have outbursts, cause him to get frustrated in practice. I get it. It's practice. It's not a live game where it's all on him. He hasn't gone through that yet. But him already showing that just in a practice setting is a great sign for this team. And he's going to need that this upcoming fall because you've got some really tough stretches. No dirt, it's the SEC. But for South Carolina, it always has felt like that they have got the shorter end of the stick in terms of the schedule. And it's no different this year. They play at Kentucky and versus LSU in weeks 2 and 3. Then, at the beginning of October, they play against Ole Miss at home. Then at Alabama and at Oklahoma. Probably the toughest 3-game stretch in the entire conference for this next year, outside of what Florida has got to deal with in the month of November. And then you got games against Texas A&M, Missouri, and Clemson in your last 5 games of the season. Yes, they're split up at least, but still, pretty tough opponents, big games that in certain cases, for South Carolina, you're going to be expected to find a way to win that game. So LaNorris Sellers is going to need every bit of that. And here's the beauty of all of this. You might recall LaNorris Sellers, when he spoke to the media back in late March while spring practice was going on, he at one point was asked, what is one thing that Spencer Rattler passed on to you while he was here in Columbia and you were basically his backup for this past season? Here's what LaNorris Sellers had to say.
LaNorris, what's the biggest thing that Spencer taught you from last year or anything in particular, maybe even Luke Doty with all the experience that he has at quarterback?
Pretty much confidence. Just if you make a decision, just be firm with your decision. Don't hesitate. Don't second guess yourself. And Spence was always just like he wasn't too high or ever too low. So I just try to take that from just being composed all the time.
For those of you who are listening to the show on an audio podcast app, I played the video clip along with the soundbite, so you probably didn't catch this. But basically, LaNorris Sellers, with the last part of that answer, he did a hand motion where he just basically made a flat line, meaning that Spencer Rattler was pretty even keel. Again, very rarely went to one end or the other in terms of his overall excitement or maybe frustration. So, obviously that speaks highly of Spencer Rattler, and it does show, hey, NFL scouts, NFL executives, he was a good teammate at South Carolina. Not going to go back into that conversation, but y'all get what I'm referring to there. But the fact that he passed that along to LaNorris Sellers, it seems like that he definitely has taken it to heart. And again, this is something that could benefit the Gamecocks greatly this upcoming fall. I get it. It's not the sexy thing to talk about. You know, people want to talk about LaNorris Sellers' running ability. They want to talk about the cannon of an arm that he possesses, how big he is, and he can move that well for that size. But how he handles everything mentally, that's going to be the most important part. Because, listen, y'all, there's going to be games this upcoming season where Sellers is going to get knocked around. Yes, he's a great athlete, and unlike Spencer Rattler, he's going to be able to make some plays out of nothing, basically, a bevy of times this upcoming season, both with his pocket navigation and also, again, his freakish athleticism for the size that he possesses. But there will be games where defenses will find a way to neutralize that, and he will get knocked around a little bit. So how does he respond in those games? Based on all of this, I would say he's going to pick himself up, rub the dirt off, and he'll be ready for the next play. And South Carolina is going to need that. With an offense that lacks clear and obvious star power at a multitude of different spots, he's going to need to be that guy in terms of the mentality that he brings to the field every single week this upcoming season if South Carolina wants to make it back to a bowl game. Now, speaking of the postseason, South Carolina's baseball team are currently in the midst of their postseason. They are now in the second round of the SEC tournament, won a pretty good game against Alabama on Tuesday afternoon by a score of 10-5. And because of how that game played out, South Carolina now has a golden opportunity in front of them. What is that golden opportunity? I'll explain what it is in a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day in just 30 minutes. I won't lie, by the time you listen to this show, the game may have already taken place. I'm recording this literally early Wednesday morning, but I've got some things that I've got to go do afterwards. So going to try to get through this as quickly as I can. South Carolina baseball still alive in the SEC tournament right now. Defeated Alabama again 10-5 on Tuesday afternoon. Big game against Arkansas taking place later on Wednesday afternoon. From this point forward, it's not single elimination. If South Carolina wins this game, they move on to the winner's bracket. Think of it like the NCAA regionals round, where you have a winner's bracket and a loser's bracket. For South Carolina, obviously based on the lack of depth they have in the bullpen, they're going to want to try to find a way to beat Arkansas and get into the winner's bracket in order to give them, say, a game where if they slip up, it's okay. You're not out of the tournament yet. And that is where the golden opportunity comes in, because the biggest story on Tuesday, obviously a lot of people like offense. So you might look at South Carolina's 4 home runs, finally scoring 5 runs or winning by 5 runs or more for the first time since the Missouri series, breaking their 6-game conference losing streak or 6 conference game losing streak. But the bigger story, the more important story, was what Chris Veach did against Alabama on Tuesday. Because what he basically did was this. He gave you starter-like innings. He went over 5 innings. 60-something pitches, by the way. Extremely efficient. I mean, if he was a regular starter and had been this season, he probably could have pitched the entire game if he really wanted to. Chris Veach was that much in the zone. But because Chris Veach did what he did, he saved other guys in the bullpen. And again, as I've said, South Carolina's bullpen, not a lot of guys in there that you can throw out there and sit there and go, okay, I trust that this guy can get some outs here. Unfortunately, that's just reality. But guys like Eric Gainey, Connor McCreary, and Eli Jones, a Ty Good, none of those guys had to go out there on Tuesday. All those guys now can be saved up for a big game against Arkansas. And I get it, Arkansas, number 2 seed, one of the better teams in the country, certainly one of the better pitching staffs in all of college baseball. This is gonna be a very tough game. And in this case, it won't be maybe a shootout type game. It will be more so, hey, who might be the first team to 5 runs? Whoever the first team is to 5 runs might be the winner of this game, if one team even gets to 5. But the thing that I think is big here for South Carolina is Eli Jones is getting the start. He had a decent outing against Arkansas. Not great, but decent. Went 4 innings back in mid-April. Gave up 8 base runners in those 4 innings and only 1 earned run in those 4 innings of work. So I think that Eli, as much as he's caught a lot of flack recently, I think you can trust him to go out there and give you some good innings, okay? Keep this Arkansas lineup that was second to last in the SEC in hits this season off balance. Then after that, you can use some of these other guys. I think that the hope for South Carolina and the golden opportunity is this. Win this game against Arkansas. Find some way to get it done. Offense, have another great outing. Pitching staff, give them enough so that they don't feel like they've got to literally score every inning. If you can do that and say, save Garrett Gainey. Gainey, again, pitched as of today, 5 days ago. It was a 90-plus pitch outing for him. These days, that's like a guy throwing 110, 120 pitches. I know the sports changed a lot in that regard. Some people have gripes with it. That's just the way it is now. We all have to deal with it. But the point here is this. I don't think that it is feasible to put Gainey out here against Arkansas today unless it's for like an inning or 2 late and you're just trying to shut the door. But if I'm Mark Kingston and the staff, my big hope is somehow, some way, you find a way to win today without having to use Gainey. Then you go to the winner's bracket. That's already one massive plus. The second massive plus is you could throw Gainey out there on Thursday. And I get it at this point. Some people might say, well, do you want to risk using up all of your starters, all your best pitchers, when you're going to have tournament games next week anyways at this point? That's pretty much a guarantee. Do you really want to risk that? And I would say, listen, at this point, South Carolina, what do you have to lose? I mean, you're not hosting a regional. You're already going to be on the road this postseason. You're not going to play a single home game. So why not just go out there with the attitude of we're going to beat you no matter who the heck you are? Why not just take that mentality every single game? I understand in some aspects you do have to plan ahead as well. But I truly think at this point, this team just needs to say, listen, let's just forget what's happened up to this point. Really, none of it matters, admittedly. Even if you haven't liked the product that you've seen, and I agree in a lot of ways, at this point, you could be the last team that gets in the field and make a run. Ole Miss did it 2 years ago. They were literally the last team to make it in the NCAA tournament. They won the College World Series. I am not going to go that far and say South Carolina's going to do something like that, but I think yesterday's game was so important because it saved the bullpen, and on top of all that, these guys finally have confidence again. It was really cool to just see the team go out there and have some fun, have a smile on their face, enjoy the game for once. It didn't really seem like they were doing any of that the last, say, 4 or 5 games against Georgia and Tennessee. And granted, again, as those two teams have shown, they're pretty doggone good. A couple of the best teams in the entire country. It's the SEC. That's the way life is at times. But I think that it was huge how they won against Alabama, more so than the fact that they just defeated them. So, be interesting to see what Eli Jones does. Maybe he gets back in a groove today. That'd be big for his confidence and definitely for the confidence of that entire pitching staff, And again, Arkansas, as great as they are on the mound, they do struggle at the plate. So I do think South Carolina, they can win this game. But obviously, again, they're going to need a few guys to go out there and have a really good outing in order for all of this to even matter. So, with that being said, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. Hope that y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show as always. What are y'all's thoughts on South Carolina's women's basketball program? Do you think that at this point it is a dynasty, or do you believe that they need another title before it can be considered a dynasty? What are your thoughts on Shane Beamer's comments on LaNorris Sellers and what he's displayed this offseason? And what are your thoughts on the baseball team and their current run down there in Hoover? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section. If you like this show, if you watch this show on YouTube, I hope that you like the show, of course. Or you can also shoot me a direct message at @aline_SC if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app. But as always, thank y'all so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, and I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.